This time on Poll Hub, tipping points. First, the impeachment tipping point that seems fast approaching. The first Republican has joined a growing crowd of Democrats in calling for the House to open impeachment proceedings. But is the public on board for this? We're going to look at the numbers. Then the polling tipping point. We have talked a lot on this podcast about online versus telephone polls. And now the Roper Center Archive, which we've also talked a lot about on this podcast, will start including internet polls in its collection. We are not tiptoeing into this episode. So let's get going. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We started asking about the prospects of impeachment, or what the public thought about impeaching Donald Trump in the last few months as the Mueller report came along. And I think it's fair to say that most people thought that that was a very distant possibility for a wide variety of reasons, including the conventional wisdom that it would help Donald Trump and so Democrats would never do it. This week is really, there seems to be some momentum, whether it happens or not, there does seem to be a change in momentum. A Republican in Congress has called for impeachment proceedings, and the Democrats in the House, not a majority by any means, but a growing number, are calling for that. We've asked about this, though, and the public does not seem to be as on board with this as some Democrats and a Republican, at least, have joined the parade. The public doesn't seem to be there.
Well, I think what the public polling has shown, and we had shown in the past as well, is that although the public didn't think that the Mueller report answered all the questions and completely cleared President Trump, there really isn't much of an appetite for further investigation, except really among Democrats. And that's really where the impetus for any kind of further investigation is coming from.
And also the reluctance on the part of Democrats in Congress necessarily to climb on board because they're not necessarily taking the independents with them.
Well, when we asked whether the Mueller report should lead to hearings to impeach President Trump, a majority, 53% of Americans, thought that it should not. And when we looked further into, well, specifically what then should Congress do, although we had a majority of Americans saying something should be done, either impeachment, which was a small group of Americans, 16%, 33% said that they thought some kind of investigation should occur. And there was actually 5% for, reprimanding the president, the concept of congressional censure. But 42% of Americans said just end the investigation at this point. I think, Lee, what you mentioned about the Democrats' dilemma is that the overwhelming proportion of Democrats do want to have some kind of further investigation. We don't see that is in fact impeachment. Democrats, only about a quarter of Democrats say that the first step here should be to move towards impeachment. But the majority do want some kind of investigation. And I think what's really interesting on this topic is that when we asked whether these were progressive Democrats who identified as progressive Democrats or moderate Democrats, there really wasn't a lot of difference when we looked at what they thought Congress should do.
Just hardcore Democrats.
Just Democrats.
Yeah. One of the things I find interesting is, we know that news cycles change really quickly, but yet the Democrats are maybe a little reluctant to go forward in Congress. That is, they're starting some rumblings, but Nancy Pelosi's still holding back. In fact, she said just recently that Donald Trump wants us to move ahead with impeachment, meaning, let's not play into his hands and get off our own message. So I thought that was kind of like
which I think is what you meant,
twist on
Jay.
everything.
Right, but she's clearly got a lot of pressure from the Democrats in the party, and there is a growing chorus. I think part of it is that we think of impeachment in Nixonian or maybe Clintonian terms, but with the president refusing to, or the administration refusing to answer subpoenas or to have their people testify, and Congress basically not being able to get anybody to testify to move forward in some of these investigations, opening impeachment proceedings provides a way with strong legal historical backing to get them to show up. And so I think the distinction we haven't asked in polls, because it's a difficult distinction to make, and it's not one that we're familiar with, is that opening an impeachment proceeding, even if you never intend to bring it to a vote, gives you the opportunity to talk to the people and ask the questions and get the investigatory tools that you need. And that seems to be where, if anything is going towards impeachment, that does seem to be, at least this week, where that's going.
So, and the point being, if Congress is charged with investigations, then they have to be able to investigate, and that gets into the whole.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think that is interesting, and that I would love to see us ask in a poll now, because it's a relevant question, is. While we asked about, do you think there should be censure or further investigation, there's kind of that split or that difference between, do you think that that an impeachment, if you think about it as impeachment, do you think the president should be removed from office, or do you think that Congress should be given the opportunity to investigate various things? There's a difference in. They're both impeachment, if you will. They're impeachment proceedings. I don't know how you ask that question, but I would love to see a more nuanced way to get at what people are thinking in terms of where they would like this to go.
You mentioned Watergate, and ever since Watergate, everything's been a gate. But here, there may be some numbers from Watergate, which might be of interest. And I thought they were kind of interesting myself. We walked back at some of the polls done mostly by Gallup after Richard Nixon had been reelected in 1972, took his second term in 73 by a huge landslide margin. His approval rating was well into the 50s, and then the hearing started. In the Senate Watergate hearings, only 19% of the Americans wanted him removed from office at that point.
When the hearings began.
When the hearings began, so there wasn't a great appetite for let's go.
If they were looking at the polls,
and he was popular,
he was popular.
If they were looking at the polls, the
He
Senate
was
would have said,
popular.
"Let's not."
And
let's not
then
do this.
fast forward a year later, the Supreme Court rules that the Nixon tapes must be turned over. If you recall, way back when, there was a big argument about
or read about it.
Or read about that. Thank you. But at that point, the 19% for removal had grown to 57%, and his approval rating had dropped from 57 to 24.
So is that what Democrats are counting on here, or hoping to accomplish here, is by doing investigations, which is what happened in Watergate, and continuing to have things come out that his support, the president's support, is chipped away? Is that what they're hoping?
And clearly, if that were to occur, we'd be looking at a very different political picture than we are right now. Presumably, some of his base would erode as well. That remains to be seen.
Although not
I think
necessarily.
The point is that in
not
Watergate,
necessarily.
Attitudes changed dramatically as more information was brought
But
out.
not necessarily among the president's base. And I think that is a little bit of a difference between Nixon's popularity. He was popular among Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And when things did go awry, I believe what was left was a very similar 30-odd% of Americans who still did support the president at that time. So I don't know how much it wears away at President Trump's base, but certainly it does affect the broader
and would move
populace.
Presumably those independents would then be united with the Democrats, as they are on some other questions, but not right now on the impeachment question. If the model repeated itself, that would then change as well.
You have heard us talk a lot over the last year and a half on Poll Hub about the different types of polls. There are online polls, there's mail polls, there's the telephone polls that we do. And we've talked a lot about the discussions that are going in the polling community about the validity or the accuracy or the quality of these different types of polls. And this has kind of broken out of the pollster community discussion and is now a little bit more mainstream. And so we thought it would be a great time to talk to somebody who's who's in the center of this. Gary Langer is president of Langer Research Associates. He's also the chair of the Roper Board's Transparency and Acquisitions Committee. You hear a lot about Roper here on this podcast as well. And he was at APOR, which is the American Association for Public Opinion Research's conference, the 74th annual conference up in Toronto. So we've got a lot to talk to him about. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
So a lot going on. I want Lee to jump in here because the non-probability, or what we tend to refer to as online polling, we've talked a lot about, as I referenced, and it has now gotten out of attention outside of the polling community, the differences and the questions about online versus telephone polling and the changes to the industry. Lee?
Yeah, well, Gary and I are both on the Roper board, and Roper board, who archives polls going way back when, and we talk about it on here a lot. Gary, you recently sort of, as a result of board action, put out a statement about the changing policy of the Roper board relative to non-probability surveys. So maybe we can just start right there and talk a little bit about the shifting policy at Roper, and then we can slide into APOR and all things new methods. But why don't we start with Roper's shifting policy?
Yeah, surely. I think we should maybe start with a little background for listeners about what the Roper Center is.
There you go.
The Roper Center for Public Opinion Research has been around since 1947. It began with the data collection from the pioneering pollster named Elmo Roper. In 1957, it was inaugurated in its current form with directors who included George Gallup and other luminaries of polling back in the day, with the idea of maintaining the essential data resources from public opinion polls that were being used to inform public judgment and political information in those days. Really, how do we carry forward a historical record of these important data sets? The collection today, just to summarize, contains more than 23,000 data sets from more than 125 countries, more than 700,000 individual questions. It is the world's largest repository of public opinion surveys. And I think, therefore, the Roper Center takes its mission really seriously.
And we are both on the board, and we wouldn't be there if it wasn't serious, right?
Yeah, let's actually just take a minute. If you don't mind, I'd like to read to you the mission statement of the Roper Center.
Sure.
It's short and sweet, but I think summarizes where we're at here. The mission of the Roper Center is to collect, preserve, and disseminate public opinion data to serve as a resource to help improve the practice of survey research and to broaden the understanding of public opinion through the use of survey data in the United States and around the world. Now, that's a pretty straightforward mission, but it does raise what I would describe as a new question for new times, which is, what are public opinion data? And that's the first and most fundamental issue that the board and the Transparency and Acquisitions Committee had to grapple with. What belongs in the archive, for what use and to what purpose? The long-standing definition is probability-based surveys, which enjoy the theoretical underpinning of inferential statistics. Yet there are many non-probability methods in use today. Non-probability online data in its many forms, hybrid data, IVR, RICS, big data, found data, social media data, administrative data, and more, as well as methods that we haven't even envisioned yet. And the question is, do these belong in the collection? That's really what the Center's board has been grappling with, and that's the underpinning, if you will, the thought process that took us in the direction of the new policy.
And so the new policy is what? How are things changing at Roper?
There's benefits and concerns of opening the collection beyond its core role in collecting probability-based surveys. If we get new materials in the collection, the benefits are that we add new dimensions to the depth and the richness of the archive. We carry out the historical preservation of influential research data, and we open these recent methods to the scrutiny of the research community, which we think is essential.
What were some of the issues and concerns that the committee was grappling with?
Exactly, Barb. So the benefits I just outlined for you, the concerns are, one is the perception that we're lending credence to unreliable data, the risk of participating in the dissemination of misinformation.
That sounds really serious.
Yeah, these are all really serious considerations. Just to continue on the concerns, the notion that we might diminish the importance of probability-based research that's at the heart of the center's collection and remains so, and also perhaps the notion that we'd be straying from the center's core mission. There are a whole lot of sources of data out there these days, and many of them have not been subjected to the full review and scrutiny of the research community. And this ultimately is the essential piece here. Research claims are a dime a dozen, and some of the new methods are questionable in terms of their adherence to underlying theoretical underpinnings, the notion of inferential statistics.
And so by bringing these data sets into the archive, what you're suggesting then is it allows us not just transparency, but an opportunity to have independent analysis and independent assessment of the different methods.
Exactly. Indeed, we started our work as the acquisitions committee of the Roper Board of Directors. And by the end, we had rebranded ourselves as the Transparency and Acquisitions Committee, because that came from the recognition that they're just inseparable.
Will there be a wall between these two methods or approaches to survey work?
Yes, we have two collections. This policy that emerged. One is we encourage the importance of probability-based methods of survey research. We preserve their place as the core of the archive in what we call the long-standing methods collection. We also recognize and encourage innovation, and that's the recently developed methods collection.
So when I go to search, Marist is a subscriber. Obviously, Lee is on the board, and we support the center, as we note each time we close the podcast. But if I go to iPoll and I'm searching on a particular topic, will I at that point be getting both probability and non-probability studies?
No, you will default to probability-based research, because probability-based research is the core of the archive. It's the long-standing method that is founded in the principles of inferential statistics and has long been tested and examined by researchers for decades, many decades, 80 decades.
Is there a gold standard in polling today?
Well, it depends what you mean, but
we referred to a gold standard of polling being telephone probability, RDD polling, not too long ago. Is there still a gold standard for doing polling?
Sure, good quality RDD, probability-based random digit dial telephone surveying is still highly accurate. In fact, more accurate than it's been in the past. Our design effects on our ABC News Washington Post polls, one of my company's products, are lower than they were 10 or 15 years ago, meaning we have a more representative sample than we had previously, and that's because we're increasingly dialing cell phones. 65% of our sample is cell phones, so we ring in your pocket, not at your home when you're not there. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we get more harder to reach people than we have in the past. So good quality, probability-based RDD telephone survey is still highly accurate. There's also a good degree of accuracy in probability-based online surveying. The fundamental principle, if you believe in the concept of inferential statistics, is that you need a probability-based sample in order to make inferences to a broader population. So not only do we have empirical data, like in the McInnes-Krosnick paper showing serious shortfalls in non-probability data in terms of the accuracy of its estimates, we also have an absence of a theoretical underpinning for that method.
Some of the publicity coming out of APOR, and I specifically referencing an article by Steve Shepard from Politico. I don't know if you saw it, but basically the title being Pollsters Rush to Patch Fraying Methods for Trump's re-election race. And it talks about how the pollsters at APOR say the old ways of conducting surveys is fading fast, but new methods may not be ready. I have some problems with that. I was wondering how you reacted to that, if you're familiar with the piece or just reacting to this notion that the old methods are fading fast, but no one's quite ready with the new stuff. Therefore, catastrophes are right around the corner.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Well, and maybe
not the panels you were at.
Not the panel you were at, but
do you think that there is some confusion, and particularly as we're going into 2020, we're going to be seeing an avalanche of polls, and from some reputable, some not so reputable sources. So is there anything that the pollster community can do and citizens can do, informed citizens can do, to kind of weed through all of these numbers that are going to be coming at them.
Yeah, Barbara, what you described has always been the case. There's survey research, public opinion polls that are carefully and thoughtfully done with tested and meaningful and empirically grounded and theoretically based methods. And there's other research that's done on the cheap or on the fly to get somebody's product or company's name in the newspaper to promote a policy or a point of view. We've always lived through this, and it is a buyer beware world. A challenge here is that the news media, I've said before, have for too long indulged themselves in the lazy luxury of being both data hungry and math phobic. And the public will hoover up any material that the media publishes, assuming that it's been checked and vetted by news organizations which abdicate the responsibility to do so. So, we see a number and a percentage sign, and we need it, we got it, we got to have it, we grab it and go. I like to say that running with numbers is like running with scissors. It's necessary to stop and investigate and learn by what means and methods these numbers were obtained and to assess whether they're reliable or not. I would also caution people about these synthetic prognostications based on polls that say things that no individual poll said, like who's going to win a presidential election, based on endless iterations of data that may be problematic in the first place.
Sure, we've talked
Not
about
all polls are.
Yeah, we've talked about the aggregators too. We've talked about the aggregators here on this podcast.
So I think, Gary, just in summarizing, I think that it's very important to have the voices of Roper, the voices of Langer Research out there, because there is so much other noise that is now occupying space in the public world that I think does a disservice to prior survey accuracy and models going forward, because, as you say, it's much easier to say all polls are wrong and oh boy, we got a big catastrophe, we're heading for the cliff, when obviously the kind of surveys you guys are doing and what we try to be doing as well, to, uphold those standards. Even if some of the noise is putting pressure on that. But thanks a lot, and we'll be watching for all your stuff coming forward in 2020.
Thank you, Lee, and thanks all.
That will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Thank you, Mary Griffith, our executive producer.
And we'd also like to thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell University. And if you were listening closely, you realize we've been talking quite a bit about them earlier on with Gary Langer. But they provide us the opportunity to look back in time, survey questions, and results over the decades.
And we like to hear from you, your questions, comments, and everything in between. Reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook. And as we say each time, but I'd like to remind you one more time, is when you look down at the device on which you are listening to this podcast, there's a subscribe button. If you hit it, then every new episode of Poll Hub will come into your queue automatically, and you won't have to hunt and search for us. We'll just be there, ready for you, generally on Fridays at some point, just to get your weekend off.
Exciting.
It is very exciting. So, anyway, thanks for joining us this week. This was a good show. We'll see you next time.